Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Legal Aid's DC's two-part training for pro bono attorneys on soft skills for client-centered lawyering. My name is Sylvia Soltis, and I'm the director of Legal Aid's pro bono program. I'm joined by my colleagues today, Elena Bowers, managing attorney in our housing law unit, Lisa Meehan, staff attorney in our public benefits unit, and Danielle Rowan, staff attorney in our pro bono program. We're excited to spend this time with you and appreciate your commitment to pro bono work. Just a couple of quick notes before we get started. Today's session is being recorded. We'll share the recording with you afterwards. Please feel free to drop questions in the Q&A box at any time. We'll monitor it through the session and address as many as we can during the presentation, with time for others at the end. Before we dive in, I want to take a quick moment to tell you a little bit about Legal Aid DC, especially for those of you who are new to our organization. Legal Aid DC is DC's oldest and largest civil legal services provider, and for more than 90 years, we have been making justice real for people living in poverty here in DC. We work across a range of practice areas: housing law, domestic violence law, family law, public benefits law, consumer law, immigration law, and criminal record sealing. We work to identify systemic issues that have an impact beyond an individual client, and our pro bono program allows us to expand our impact in the DC community by providing legal assistance and representation to hundreds of additional individuals and families each year in almost all of our practice areas. Through partnerships with attorneys just like you, we're able to help more people. So whether it's preventing a family from being evicted, securing benefits for someone with a disability, or sealing an eligible criminal record sealing, pro bono attorneys can change lives. And that brings us to today's training. Strong advocacy isn't just about knowing the law. Although I will say we do have plenty of trainings and videos on our pro bono practice areas. Strong advocacy is also about how we show up for our clients, the ability to listen with empathy, build trust, navigate sensitive situations. These all can make a difference in a case. This two-part training is designed to strengthen those essential soft skills. Today's virtual session will introduce the foundations of trauma-informed, client-centered lawyering. Next week's in-person session will give you a chance to practice these skills through interactive learning. By the end, my hope is that you will have practical tools to communicate more effectively, build stronger client relationships, and advocate in ways that empower your clients. So again, thank you for being here and for everything you will do to help our community. And now with that, I am now pleased to present our, I just lost my screen. I am pleased to present more fully our presenters who will be leading today's session. Elena Bowers is the managing attorney in our housing law unit. She advocates for clients and systemic change. Our housing law practice is Legal Aid's largest unit and the source of the majority of pro bono case referrals. Elena also serves as an expert mentor in our pro bono case referrals. So if you take on a landlord-tenant case, there is a good chance you'll get to work directly with her. Later, we'll hear from Lisa Meehan. Lisa is a staff attorney in our public benefits unit. She represents clients in a wide range of public benefits matters, including Social Security, disability benefits programs, temporary assistance for needy families, supplemental nutrition assistance program, Medicaid, Medicare, and unemployment insurance. So now that we know them both a little bit better, I want to pass it over to you, Elena.
Thank
Elena,
you,
you are so.
Sylvia. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. I apologize. I've been having some technology issues this morning. So if those pop up, I apologize in advance. So like Elena said, my name is Elena Bowers. I'm the managing attorney in the housing unit. Excited to be here to talk to you about these soft, quote unquote, soft skills. And I look forward to being with folks in person next week to practice some of these. So, like as Sylvia mentioned, our goal today is to learn some of these skills or revisit some of these topics if you're already familiar with them. If we can move on to the next slide. We're gonna open the chat real quick to let folks take a minute to reflect on why you're here today. What brought you to this training? What made you sign up to spend this time of your morning with us learning about these issues? And I think we're opening the chat so that folks can see, so that we can see folks' responses. You know, and there are a lot of reasons that people could join, and we look forward to working with folks. I know it's early, so feel free to take a sip of your coffee as you're thinking about these issues. You know, and I know it can be challenging to share, but we do encourage folks to share. I think the more everyone is able to participate, the more we can all get out of it. Found a similar training helpful. That's awesome. Better communication skills. That's great. Want to represent community members and do it well. That's awesome. New to Pro Bono, welcome. We're excited to have you. A good refresher, yes. You know, I think that the communication skills that we focus on in our work is also just good communication skills for communicating with people across a lot of areas. And so trauma-informed approaches, that's great. And we're always happy to help you find additional trainings if we're not focusing as much on trauma as you're interested in, because there are a lot of really good, very in-depth trainings on trauma. All right, thanks to everyone for sharing. Let's go ahead and dive right in. So, you know, taking a moment, we're talking about soft skills in direct legal services for pro bono. Direct legal services are just, you know, representing people, you know, legal services for real people. We want to make sure that people are getting representation that's accessible to them and empower them to make important decisions about their lives, because this is, you know, these cases deal with some of the most foundational pieces of someone's lives: their family, their relationships, their health, their housing. And sometimes you may hear this as client-centered lawyering, which is a great term for it as well. But our clients are generally coming to us not because they want to, but because they need our expertise. Some of our clients may be in court for the very first time and have never worked with a lawyer. Some may have a very valid distrust of lawyers based on previous experiences. And so we're working on preparing ourselves to go in and be ready to have what can be challenging conversations. Many of our clients' experience include crisis, trauma, limited resources, sort of lots of things that impact how we work with people. So your goal as an attorney providing these direct legal services is, of course, to obtain the best legal outcome available to the client. You want to get the most food stamps available. You want to protect and preserve their housing. You want to make sure they end up with the, division of parenting that they want. But your other goal is to build trust with your client, to engage with them, empower them to make the decisions in their case. Because, you may be the expert in what the legal options are for them, but they are the only person who can decide what is the best outcome for their lives. And I think anyone who takes a couple of these cases is going to have clients that make decisions that you might not have made if you think about putting yourself in their shoes, but they are the expert in their own lives. And so for me in housing cases, this has looked like taking a case to trial where we're pretty sure we're going to lose, and we've told the client we're going to lose, but they really want their day in court because what happened was really unfair. Or helping your client move out, even though you think you could win and you think they're not going to be able to find a place to move. But if that is the best decision in their lives, that has to be your goal also. In a family case, it may mean withdrawing a petition for a protective order because your client has returned to their partner. And it is not our job to decide whether or not that's a good outcome for someone's life. And so today we're going to explore some of the skills that can help us navigate the relationships with our clients and the challenges that come with it, and some of the conversations that we will engage in. So now I want everyone to think about an interaction that you've had in your life with someone in another professional field. And so this could be the medical field, financial field, or a legal field where you're sort of out of your depth, like talking to ethics counsel or something like that. And I think we've all had experiences like this where we feel confused. We feel like the person that we're talking to knows more than us about something. And sometimes we feel good about that interaction and sometimes we feel bad about them. And sometimes we work with people who straight up just don't make us feel good. And so I want you to take a second and think about what about these interactions make you feel bad? Like when you leave the doctor and you're like, wait, I'm not sure I understood what happened. What about that interaction and how that person interacted with you makes you feel bad? And please, no need to share personal information. You can just talk about sort of like what the traits of the conversation were. If folks feel comfortable sharing in the chat, I think the chat is open. We'll give folks a minute or two to think about that. Move too quickly. Yes, thanks for sharing. I feel like about 2 years into this work, I had my first child. And that experience with the doctor and the hospital and the anesthesiologist, I had the opportunity in air quotes, to meet, with 20 or 25 different professionals and had a wide range of responses, including some really horrible ones. So it really made me think about that position of being vulnerable and needing someone else's help and needing, needing someone who could help me understand where I was. I did not like that feeling of being that vulnerable in those moments. And there were people who made me feel really comfortable, and there were people who didn't. And I think you can learn a lot of lessons sort of from thinking about those times when you feel vulnerable and uncomfortable and what makes you feel better in those moments, and then trying to apply those to your conversations, even difficult conversations with clients. Make things seem obvious, yes. Formulaic responses, yes. You know, it could be that doctor's everyday thing to see some horrible thing happen to someone, but, you know, it's the only time it's happened to you, right? So, you know, I see eviction cases every day, but I meet clients and it's the first time they've seen this, and it can be really, really scary. Thank you to folks for sharing. And reflecting. Thank you. Okay, so we're talking broadly about soft skills. I want to very, very clearly state out front that we are calling them soft skills, not because they are any easier to develop or learn or practice than your technical skills. But your technical skills are mostly what you learned in law school. The reason that you are a lawyer, what you needed to pass the bar, your legal research, sort of your writing, trial advocacy, procedural skills, sort of the technical understanding, breaking down what is available to a client. The soft skills are how you explain that to your client, sort of how you interact with your client, how you relate to your client, how you make your client feel. And a lot of our clients have bad choices to make, right? And I think the best that we can do when we're presenting someone with bad choices is be clear, make them understand, make them feel heard and seen, and like empathize with them, right? And so those are the things we're going to be talking about some today. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about sort of is the broadest category, and that's just emotional intelligence and how to think about our role as lawyers in an emotionally intelligent, or in the light of thinking about emotional intelligence and how important it is to be aware of ourselves when we're relating to other people. Next slide. So emotional intelligence sounds easy, but it is actually a very broad and far-reaching topic. It's the subject of dissertations, books, and some of my favorite movies. You know, and as this clip for folks is from a movie called Inside Out. If you haven't watched it, you can learn a lot about emotions and emotional intelligence from that movie, even though it's a children's movie. So emotional intelligence is just the ability to manage your own emotions and the ability to recognize the emotions of the people around you. Seems simple, but I think it is definitely something that is a lifelong learning process, and a lot of us are unaware of, or were unaware of until adulthood, right? That these are both things that are involved in every single interaction, every single conversation. Once again, I'm going to ask folks to reflect about a workplace interaction where you had a heightened emotional reaction, and how your emotional reaction affected the interaction, and how the listener may have perceived your emotional state, or how you thought the listener was perceiving your emotional state. I'm already running a few minutes behind, so I'm just going to ask you folks to think about it. I'm not going to pause a long time, but I think that it's helpful to reflect on this because even as sort of educated professionals, I think most of the people on this call are lawyers, you know, our emotions still show up with us every day. And, you know, if we feel angry when we're getting feedback or defensive when we're getting information, that impacts our ability to absorb the information, our ability to relate to the person giving it to us, and our ability to sort of move through what we need to do in order to accomplish whatever our underlying goal is. So in practice, you know, and again, this is something you could write a dissertation on. So we're going to do real top line here. If it's something that you're interested in, we're happy to send out additional resources. But emotional intelligence is knowing yourself, right? Know how to prepare yourself for court. Does that mean you eat right before? Does that mean you don't eat? Does that mean whatever you need to do to be as steady and calm and collected as you can going into your representations? And so that's your conversations, that's your court appearances, and it's important to show up for your clients while you need to sort of tend to your own emotional health. And we are not effective advocates when we're emotionally heightened, overwhelmed, or stressed out. And I know that, for us in the housing unit, we often feel incredibly frustrated and indignant and, offended and angry by sort of the way that opposing counsel treats our clients. But I can't help my client get the best settlement if I'm just arguing and yelling at opposing counsel, or if opposing counsel is yelling at me and if I'm getting heated, then I can't effectively, communicate or navigate that situation for my client, right? Because I'm not there to defend my honor. I'm not there to win an argument, right? I'm there to get the best result for my client. And so in order to focus on that, I need to know myself and manage my own stress and sort of plan for the conversations, plan for what I need to stay calm and cool and collected in those conversations. And then I think the second prong is quite a bit harder. It's harder for most of us, I'll say. It's recognizing the emotions of the people around you. And, these are things that apply not only at work or in pro bono cases, right? This applies sort of across the board with family, friends, and you can go into your meetings, for example, with a clear goal. But if your client had a really bad morning because their landlord posted something new on their door or their ex-boyfriend called them and yelled at them for the kids, you need to see how they are emotionally showing up and adjust the conversation, adjust the needs accordingly. And sometimes that involves a really hard conversation, being like, hey, we have this filing. I really need some information. I know you're having a hard time. I'm going to give you a few minutes, but then I need to come back. We need to come back and really get through this. And so it just requires you to know yourself, know and be able to recognize the person that you're working with and how they're doing, and sort of practice empathy and sort of some creativity, frankly, sometimes during tough moments. I want to make sure that, so we're wrapping up the first section about emotional intelligence. I think the chat is generally off, but I do think people will be able to ask questions if folks have questions. You can send a message and we can try to respond to questions as they come through. Oh, I lost my mouse. Okay. Thinking about emotional intelligence and knowing yourself. The computer this morning wasn't working and I was feeling really flustered and going into this. And if I was going to go into a conversation with a client in that state, I would need to do some work to calm myself down in order to really show up and see what the client needs. That's the type of thing that can impact, right? And can impact our communication with our clients. Okay. Next slide, please. So the next topic that we're going to cover is communicating across difference. And in giving this presentation, I am looking at a picture of myself and the PowerPoint. I don't know anything about most of the people showing up. I am making some assumptions about them, about you all based off of your attendance here. But, part of what I want to say is I don't know exactly who I'm talking to. And so I want to make sure to name that I'm making some assumptions going into this. So the first thing we want to introduce is the concept of cultural humility. And cultural humility, the textbook definition, is a lifelong process of self-reflection and acknowledgement of our own biases. It's understanding that our identities are complex, always evolving, and inform and impact our interactions with other people. And this is distinguishable from the concept that I learned growing up, which was cultural competence. And I'm aging myself maybe there, but it was more focused on the idea that if you are aware of someone's cultural differences, you can learn about them a little bit, and then you can be done. You can have achieved that level of competence or knowledge. And I think there has been, that concept has evolved into the concept of humility, right? Like, we are not going to know everything about people who are different than us. And we are going to need to continue to learn and grow and acknowledge that we are the students in those relationships. It requires introspection, knowing the parts of your identity that impact how you're perceived. And in lawyering, that includes both our positions as individuals and sort of our individual identities, but also the identities of our firms, our organizations, and how those are perceived as well. It means appreciating your client's expertise. Like I said earlier, they're the only ones who can make decisions about their lives, because they are the only ones who understand the full complexity of how a decision will impact their life. Importantly, it's a lifelong process, which means you'll make mistakes, right? You'll make assumptions about someone that prove to be false, and you have to revisit them. And you need to be willing to learn and grow and evolve. And I think, by being here, you're showing that sort of you're interested in continuing and growing that. All right, now we are going to watch a short video about cultural humility and how it shows up in representation.
Okay, so given your separation from Camilo and that Mateo lives primarily with you, I would recommend that we pursue sole custody. It would simplify decision making and protect you legally.
No, no, no. I'm not looking for sole custody.
Okay, so then we could pursue shared custody, but with you as the primary custodian?
Not that either. I'm thinking of something more balanced.
Okay, can you share what that would look like for you?
Yeah. So Mateo isn't just being raised by me and Camilo. Our families are also involved. My aunt picks him and his cousins up from soccer together, and Camilo's mom watches Mateo on Thursday nights. That's how we've always done it. And the idea of isolating custody to one or two people doesn't reflect how our parenting works right now.
Okay, but the court will look for a custody plan that identifies a legal custodian.
And I'm prepared to name myself for those purposes, but I don't want it to seem like I'm the only one raising him or that Camilo is being excluded.
Okay. But I also want to let you know that based on custody time, financials, and the parenting split, you'd also potentially be entitled to child support.
I don't want to request it. I'm not trying to make a statement or anything. It's just not worth the tension it will cause between our families. We usually resolve things by discussing them together, not going to court.
Okay, I think I understand. It is just a different approach than the ones our clients normally take. So, just to make sure I understand, you're looking for a legal framework that would leave room for community based caregiving and that would keep the door open between you and Camilo.
Right. I just want to maintain the arrangements we have, just with some legal recognition.
Okay, so I'll get to work on an agreement that would support that dynamic. It might just take some extra drafting and research, but I'll do my best to make sure that the court understands where you're coming from.
That sounds great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you for being honest with me. It helps me do my job better of representing you.
Thanks, Sylvia. I hope everyone was able to either hear or follow along with the captions. I think that this is an example of when the lawyer shows up with a certain set of assumptions and then is able to adjust those assumptions based off of centering the client's experience and the client's decision making. Excuse me. I think that this is possible because it shows that there must have already been trust and relationship between the attorney and the client for the client to feel comfortable speaking up and really sharing more vulnerably about what they are looking for. Okay, so as we're talking about communication across difference, it's important to explicitly think about the differences between people that impact how we see the world and how we communicate with others. And of course, this is not an exhaustive list about the differences between people, but it can be some of the ones that may show up, especially in our representation. So most of the people, if not all of the people that we are representing, have a different educational level than the lawyers in the room. I don't think I've ever represented a lawyer through my work. Some of my clients have been educated and have had, an issue arise where they're no longer working or something like that. Some of my clients haven't finished high school, sort of a whole gamut. But it's important to think about your client's educational experience in terms of adjusting how you are writing to them, for example, how much you're explaining your retainer, like will they understand the words in your retainer, et cetera. So, language, of course, some of our clients are not English speakers or not dominant English speakers. And so religion can impact, whether a client wants to get a divorce versus maintain a separation or something like that. Race, the majority of our clients at Legal Aid are African-American, the majority are Black families or Black women. You need to think about socioeconomic status, like if someone's living in poverty, sort of how that impacts their ability to communicate, their communication with you, like what else is going on in their life that may impact the way that they're showing up today. Age is a big one. I'm not going to age myself, but my daughter has started using slang that I don't understand. Sometimes I will be communicating with older clients who may not understand something that I'm saying, and I think that's a big factor. I think, I, as a no longer young, but as a young woman in the field, I also had to sort of feel like I was proving myself both with my client and opposing counsel and with the court, right? Those are other ways when we're showing up and communicating across difference. And then another one is disability or ability status. If your client has if your client's neurodivergent, if your client has sort of a disability that makes it hard for them to move around or makes it hard for them to hear, or, sort of there are all sorts of differences that impact how we show up and how we communicate in this life. And noticing these differences and thinking about how to adapt and adjust to them doesn't make us biased against our clients. It makes us able to better connect with and see our clients as the individual humans that they are. And, in day-to-day life, but here focusing on clients. There are some challenges that come with communicating across difference, specifically in our work. Your communication style. Your client may be more informal. Your client may be more formal. Your client may be hesitant to give you information because of perceptions of your bias or something like that. You could have biases towards your clients and sort of have assumptions based on those biases about what they're saying when they're actually trying to say something else. And it's important to just think about those things, and you're not going to, thinking about them really, really hard isn't going to change the fact that they exist, but it will help you adapt more quickly. there are power balances. You know, you are a free lawyer for them. And so you need to think about how they see that, and how you are seeing that, right? I sometimes think that my time is very valuable. You know, I'm moving from one thing to the next. And if a client wants to talk for a long time, I get annoyed and I think about that. And it can be really hard because like each of my clients deserves the same amount of time, and I'm balancing these other things, right? And so that's where some of that emotional intelligence comes in too, right? Is thinking about how you're showing up in individual conversations given all the other things. Okay. So we're going to focus in on socioeconomic difference now, to talk a little bit about how that shows up. And now, again, like I said before, I don't know most of you. Okay. I see an answer from, okay. In this example, the client did a great job advocating for their family's unique needs. But sometimes in my law school clinic, I got the impression that the client didn't know what they didn't know, if that makes sense. Yes. And therefore couldn't provide that level of self-advocacy. Absolutely. So how do you elicit that information when our lawyer-client differences create a knowledge gap that we can't see? Yes, that is such a great question. And that's sort of what we are trying to do by slowing down, by breaking apart some of these differences, right? And, you know, I think one of the things here is that client showed a level of sophistication about their self-advocacy that can be hard for clients. And I think that we need to, in our representation, make sure at every conversation, we are setting the expectation that the client is in charge of decision making, right? And so, ask more open-ended questions to understand sort of what the client is thinking about the options, to elicit the options that the client wants and the client is interested in, and then be able to sort of read the legal framework onto that. This is not going to be the first interaction between this lawyer and this client, obviously, right? So there would have had to be more. You know, I think there are a lot of ways that this lawyer-client interaction could have improved too in this way. But I think the important thing to show is that the lawyer was able to recognize their client's lived experience and move through that and adjust expectations. Thank you for that great question. Okay, socioeconomic difference. Your client is here because they need a free lawyer, but that doesn't mean we understand their socioeconomic status, their history, or sort of anything about them other than they are here because they need a free lawyer. And, you know, I'm making assumptions about the people behind here, but I don't know, you know, everyone has attained a certain educational level. I don't know how many folks on the call have experienced poverty, but if you've never experienced poverty, you're communicating with someone who is living a very different life experience. And, you know, one time early in my practice, I was stunned when a client canceled a meeting with me because I was like, we have court tomorrow, we need to practice. And I was like, we need to practice, we talked about this. And she was like, I can't pay for the bus. Like, I can't get there. Like, it's not, I don't have the money, you know, and I don't think I understood up until that conversation, the level of poverty that we were talking about and the ways that that impacts even the like little things in the representation, or what I perceived as little things, like a bus fare. And this impacts our ability to communicate with clients, whether or not they have a phone, whether they can afford the travel, can they focus if they haven't eaten, can they make a protective order payment if their retirement is late? And so it's just something to be thinking about at all the time. So next slide, please. You know, we have clients who are non-English speakers or are not dominant English speakers. And, you know, so we encourage folks to think critically about how you're interacting with clients if you don't have a shared language. And it's important to sort of recognize that their native language is a source of their power, is a source of their agency. It's important for them to be able to communicate in their native language so that they are able to get all of the information that they need. And so that means working with interpreters, making sure the interpreter speaks the same dialect or understands your client's dialect. You know, and this can require more time, more energy, more planning, but it's important to be providing that same level of thoughtful service. Okay, moving on to talking about trauma. Many of our clients have experienced trauma in some way. I am not a social worker. I'm not an expert in trauma. We include these because we encourage people to have some understanding about this and how it may impact communication. And for our clients, trauma can look a lot of different ways. It can mean growing up food insecure. It can mean having lived through an abusive relationship. It can mean repeated exposure to violence in the neighborhood. You know, and trauma is the human response, not the actual stressor. So the stressor itself could be small and repeated. It could be big events. It could be something that you know, have never thought could be a trauma stressor. And trauma overwhelms our ability to integrate the emotional experience and understand what's going on. And so it can have responses that are emotional, cognitive, behavioral, or physical. For me, I want to focus on the cognitive impact, because I think many of our clients if our clients experience trauma, they may have a hard time remembering things. They may have a hard time keeping appointments. They may have a hard time getting to court. You know, so in housing, my practice area is not usually the subject of litigation. Usually isn't the trauma the way it may be in a family case or in a public benefits case. But many of my clients have been impacted by trauma that shows up in the representation. You know, I had a client who was a veteran who had severe PTSD, who couldn't remember appointments or hearings. And so we just had to build into our communication sort of ways to plan for that and to extra reminders and stuff like that. And so it's just important to think about that as you're working with your client. And your client may never come in and say, I have experienced trauma, right? It's just something to think about in thinking about how your client is showing up. On the next page, we have some interview tips, sort of start with basic questions, acknowledge when you're gonna have challenging conversations up front, plan for them, you know, follow up with specific questions as necessary, sort of try to limit the number of times you're engaging in challenging conversations, you know, offer breaks, water, reconvene if necessary. Sort of some of that emotional intelligence comes into play here. You know, and these are just sort of best practices for interviews generally. Okay, next slide. So a couple of brief takeaways. You know, you're going to work on, it's important to sort of center that cultural humility and think about this as like a growth, an area for growth always. You want to make plans for communication. You want to think about how differences may impact our communication. You want to be curious about your clients, curious about their lives, curious about sort of how things came to be the way that they are. And think about sort of trauma-informed best practices, whether or not trauma is at the center of your representation, because they're sort of also just general best practices when working with clients, and most of our clients have experienced trauma. Okay, so I ran a little bit long, but that is the end of my section. I'm gonna pass it over to Lisa to talk about active listening next.
Thank you so much, Elena. And hello, everybody. I feel like the webinar is kind of funny because I can't actually see your guys' faces, but it's lovely to see your names on the list. And thank you so much for taking the time to do this training with us. I know everything is really busy, but these are really important skills. And so I'm just happy that you all are here. Um, so my section of the presentation is a little bit more kind of concrete about the tools and skills to put those concepts that Elena was talking into practice. A little bit about me is that, like Sylvia said at the beginning, I do public benefits law. So a lot of the cases that I work on have to do with really sensitive information. The disability cases and home health aid cases and healthcare cases that I work on involve talking about different diagnoses that my clients have and symptoms that they experience that can be really stigmatized or sensitive to talk about. And Also, a lot of the benefits programs that my clients inherently receive as being public benefits clients are often very shamed or stigmatized to receive in this country. And so, talking about a lot of things that can bring up a lot of different emotions for people. So, we're going to talk first about active listening and then move on to some skills for clear and direct communication. So active listening, there's a lot of different definitions of this, but it's mostly three different things: paying attention, understanding, and responding. So all of the techniques we're going to go over are kind of like different tools in a tool belt. They're not going to work for every person. They're not going to work for every situation. So you kind of pick what works for you and adjust based on the client or the other person that you're talking to. One of the techniques is trying to be fully present. This ties back to what Elena spoke about in the first half of the presentation, that emotional intelligence requires being aware of your own emotions, and grounding helps you do that. So during conversations, you can use different techniques similar to those used in meditation or in therapy. So focusing on your senses and what you can see, focusing on your breath. I will say for me, this does not come naturally to me at all. I find this very difficult. I find meditation very difficult. But it's an important skill set to work on so that you can be aware of your emotions and grounded in your conversation so that you're able to actually listen to your client. It's also important to try not to multitask. I know things are busy, our days are always very busy, but as much as you can, turning off those notifications, not looking at your computer, not looking at your email, and trying not to think about other cases or other things you may have going on while you're listening to your client. Something else to think about, we can move on. Um, the next thing is body language, also something that does not come very naturally to me. I feel like my body language is at baseline quite closed off. I tend to cross my arms, I tend to kind of fidget, cross my legs, things like that. And so it takes conscious effort to really try and sit still, ground your feet on the floor, uncross your arms, uncross your legs. Don't move around in your office chair. Something else to consider is maybe not having your laptop open for notes during every conversation or during every part of the conversation. Having something kind of open where you're breaking eye contact and having a screen kind of be between you and your client if you're in person can kind of interrupt that open body language. And so thinking about maybe can you put it away? Are there parts of the conversation where you don't have to take notes, or if you can take notes by hand? That's something to think about. Another thing is eye contact. Eye contact really differs based on person to person, right? Some people are comfortable with eye contact and it can help build connection. Other people find it very uncomfortable. So just kind of observing how your client makes eye contact and how they react to your eye contact and adjust accordingly. And this goes back to emotional intelligence as well, is that it's being aware of your own emotions and also reading the emotions of others. And so learn to be able to pay attention to your client's body language as well. How do they seem to be receiving your conversation? Do they seem uncomfortable? Do they seem nervous? And what tools can you take from your tool belt to help them feel more comfortable? Another tool to talk about is trying to listen to understand and not to immediately respond or judge. I think we've all kind of been in conversations with different people in different contexts where you can feel that they're not really listening to you. A lot of people were sharing in the chat earlier about those feelings, especially sometimes in medical settings where you feel like the person's not really listening to your questions and your individual circumstances, and maybe they're just internally already planning their response and planning their opinion to what you're saying without really hearing you first. And so, the listener, the person receiving that kind of thing, they can feel it, like they can tell that that's what you're doing. So, to the extent to which you can really just try to listen first, maybe think about follow-up questions or things that they're saying that you want to better understand or get more details about, but not mentally jumping in immediately to problem solving or to your own opinions until you've had time to sit with that information that your client has shared with you. Patience is also really key, doing your best to not interrupt or to not quickly change the subject without acknowledging that you're changing the subject. Sometimes you do have to redirect a conversation. So usually when I have to interrupt or redirect, I'll say something like, Ms. Doe, I'm going to jump in here, or I'm going to pause you. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I want to make sure that we have enough time to talk today about, whatever the urgent issue is. Maybe there's a filing, maybe there's a deadline coming up. I'll explain, we have this deadline coming up and there's some more information that I need to get in order to be prepared for that. So is it all right if we pivot, talk about that? I can ask you some questions. And then if we have some time at the end of the call, we can return to this issue, or we can schedule a follow-up call maybe to talk about whatever the other thing that they want to talk to you about. The last thing about listening to understand is really trying to be self-aware of if you are judging the client or their situation, and not getting defensive if you notice that you are doing that. That kind of judgment is not going to serve your relationship with the client or help you get a good outcome in their case. And so, noticing that when that starts to happen, is the first step towards mitigating it. Another tool is trying to ask open-ended follow-up questions. This goes hand in hand with listening to understand, and also some of the things that Elena was talking about in the first half of the presentation about how it's really the clients that should be setting the goals for their legal case and not the lawyer who should be dictating those goals. And so this kind of is a tool that helps allow you to really make sure that you are understanding how the client is thinking and feeling about the situation and what the client's goals are. It helps to keep the conversation open to really hear that instead of steering it towards a particular direction or signaling that there's a particular answer that you are looking for from them. Another tool for active listening is paraphrasing and reflecting. This signals to your client first that you are listening to them, that you are actually hearing what they are saying, and that helps build rapport and trust. And it also helps you do accurate and detailed information gathering. This ties back in with what Elena was saying about with trauma. Something that really it was a helpful thing that I learned early in my time in this field is how understanding how trauma impacts how we're recalling information. I have a lot of conversations with clients where the timeline isn't matching up, right? Where they say something happened at a certain time, like I called the agency last week, and then all later in the conversation they say, oh, actually I didn't call them, or I called them earlier, or things aren't really matching up. And a lot of that kind of, if you're feeling that that the information that your client is telling you isn't really clicking, a lot of times that is because trauma is impacting the way that the information recall happens. And so paraphrasing and reflecting and clarifying and repeating back to people can help kind of smooth out those kinds of not inconsistencies, but making sure that you're really getting all the information from them in the fullest way possible. And so the outcomes of active listening are building rapport and trust and eliciting better information. Seems kind of self-explanatory, but I really want to highlight how these outcomes are central to having a successful outcome in your case. That's why, these soft skills that we're talking about are not tangential. They're not an afterthought to the other quote unquote hard or technical skills like your legal expertise that you learned in law school. You can't have a successful outcome in your case without this additional component of the client relationship, the client communication, and respect. So brief takeaways from this section, and then we'll move on to the last section. Being fully present, grounding in your body, and really being fully present while you're listening to clients, being aware of body language, both yours and the client's, trying to listen to understand and not immediately jumping to thinking about your response or having any judgments. Asking open-ended follow-up questions to really understand where your client is coming from, and paraphrasing and reflecting back to the client to make sure that you are understanding everything that they are trying to communicate to you. Okay. Our last section of the presentation is going to be about clear and direct communication. These are just some strategies and tools that I use to, sorry, to communicate with clients. So the first one of these is some tools for establishing and maintaining client contact. And like I said, with active listening, this is really crucial because you can't have a successful outcome in your case if you're not able to get in touch with your client and maintain contact in a way that works for both them and you. I want to emphasize that this works both ways. This is about making sure that you can get a hold of them, but also making sure that they know how to reach you and that they feel comfortable reaching out to you if they feel like they need to talk to you. So during the beginning of the case, I try to talk explicitly with my clients about the best ways to get in touch with them and then any backup methods as well. Like Elena was talking about with her client who wasn't able to come to a meeting because they couldn't afford a bus fare, I think sometimes we aren't really understanding or thinking about how poverty is impacting our clients' ability to participate in their case. And so a lot of our clients sometimes are not able to pay their phone bills and they experience interruptions in their phone coverage. And the number that you had been contacting them at is no longer working. And so making sure that you talk with your client about that. Do they ever experience interruptions with their phone? Do they have a second phone number that you can contact? Do they have another app, maybe like on WhatsApp, that they can use on Wi-Fi, even if their main service is off? Is there an emergency contact, a friend or a family member that you can call if their phone is off to get their new phone number? Things like that. Getting to know their preferences for contact. This is very client specific. I have some clients who I only WhatsApp with because that's what they're comfortable with. I have other clients who prefer being emailed in advance to set up a time to call because they don't feel comfortable kind of being cold called by me, which is fine. I have other clients who prefer me to just cold call them and see if they're free. I have other clients who really prefer texting and don't prefer calling because they're busy and it's easier for them to text while they're at work or out doing their other things. It's also important to know your client's schedule. So knowing if they work, knowing if they have childcare obligations, knowing if there's other factors that affect like what days of the week or what times of day are best to get in touch with them. I've got clients who work where I'm like, I know I can only call them after 4 p.m. when they're home. I have clients who have childcare stuff in the mornings and afternoons. So I know that the best time to talk to them is when their kids are at school in the like late morning, early afternoon. I have other clients who have medications that affect their sleep schedule or their ability to kind of be awake and alert for a call. So I know that like I can't call them in the morning when they're still drowsy from their medication that they took at night. Things like that. What else? Something else to know is that a lot of clients will also pick up the phone for you, even if they're not actually free. A lot of clients will see that it's you calling and they'll be like, this is my lawyer, this is important, I'm gonna take this. And so usually when I call clients, the first thing I'll do is say, did I catch you at a good time? Or do you want to schedule a time for me to call you back later today or tomorrow? And I can't tell you the number of times clients have said, oh yeah, I'm actually like on my way to go pick up my kids, or I'm actually at work, but like I thought it was important, so I wanted to answer. And I say, no worries at all. Like I can call you when you're home from work, like what time works for you. Um, and also remember that it may take a few tries to get in touch. Like Elena said, we don't know what's going on in people's lives at any given moment. And so if you aren't hearing back from your client, they're not necessarily like intentionally ignoring you or don't care about the case. They may have something that's going on that is impacting their ability to get back in touch with you. And so it may take a few tries. It may take trying a few different ways to get in touch with them, a few different strategies. And if you've talked with your client in advance about what those strategies can be, it can be a lot easier to reestablish that contact. The last thing I want to talk about in this slide is making sure that this conversation goes both ways and making sure that you're communicating with them about the best ways to get in touch with you. So I'll usually explain to my clients, like, you can call me anytime. This is my direct line. You can call it, but it's going to be about a 50-50 shot that I'll be able to pick up. And that's just because my job is very call heavy, very meeting heavy. I say 50-50 chance if you call me, I might be on the phone with another client and not be able to answer. But it's not because I'm trying to ignore you. So please, like, leave me a voicemail and then I'll get notified that you called, and I will do my best to call you back as soon as I can. I try to return calls within 1 day. If I haven't called you back within 1 day, you can call me again. You can send me a text. I also tell clients they can text me anytime and that I also am okay receiving texts outside of work hours. I'll just probably respond to them during work hours. But if they're texting me over the weekend or over the evening, to not worry about that doesn't bother me. That's a personal thing. That doesn't have to be like what everybody does, but that's like something that I know about myself. And so I can kind of communicate that that's okay to them. Another thing with communication is just making sure that you are managing your clients' expectations and that they kind of know like what to expect from you in terms of timing and transparency, and any limitations in your practice. In my field, I work with a lot of government agencies where there's not a lot of transparency. And so we're asking, an agency to do something with somebody's benefits, and there's just like no timeline on how long that's going to take. And it's really hard for me to get clear information about how long certain things are going to take. And I'll be really upfront with that about that with the client, right? I'll tell them this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be sending a message via these channels. I'm going to be calling. I'm going to be, whatever I am doing. And I'll say I don't always get a response to these things. If I do get a response, I'll let you know right away. And if this doesn't work, then we'll try, plan B, plan C, plan D until we're able to get some movement. I'll also try to be really explicit about what to expect anytime we're doing anything in court or tribunal. I feel like this is something that we're used to, or we may be used to in our field of work, but it's not necessarily something that our clients have experienced before. Most of my practice is at the Office of Administrative Hearings in DC, and it operates very differently from like DC Superior Court or like more formal courts that people may have experienced in other areas of their life or like seen in media. And so a lot of my clients can feel very uncomfortable with the idea of presenting a complaint at the Office of Administrative Hearings. And I'll explain to them, that actually often happens over the phone. Oftentimes we're able to resolve things before we get in front of a judge. If we do go in front of a judge, it's on the phone, you're off camera, and it's a lot more informal than typical court. And when you explain those kinds of I'm losing my words. When you explain what to expect, it can make people feel a lot more comfortable. The last thing for this slide is just making sure that you're keeping regular contact with your client, even if you don't have updates. Our cases can go on for a long time, like they can go on for years. I think my longest standing case I have right now has been open for about 9 years. And so you're not always going to have updates all the time, but just making sure that you're checking in, that you know what's going on in their life and that they know that you are working on your case, working on their case. Yeah. Something else to think about is being aware of the language that you're using. Elena was talking about this earlier in the presentation. If you don't necessarily know and shouldn't be making assumptions about what kind of level of education and what language your client is comfortable in. So I usually err on the side of avoiding any terms that I learned in 1L, basically. I remember being in 1L and feeling like it was law school, but it was also language school with the number of new terms that I was learning every day. And so, yeah, trying to avoid those terms, but also not assuming that your clients don't know those terms. So I had a client stop me once and I was trying to explain what some legalese term was and said, hey, I was a paralegal for like 15 years. I actually know what this is. And I said, thank you so much for sharing that with me. And I won't explain all these legal terms to you anymore because you definitely know them. So an example of this, a lot of times I am filing motions to voluntarily dismiss when things are resolved. So a way that I usually explain that to clients is I say, because the issue with your benefits has been resolved, we now have the responsibility to tell the court that things are fixed and that we don't need to have a hearing anymore. So I'd like to file something in writing with the court telling them that we can cancel the case and we don't need to have a hearing. That's usually an example of like how I would explain something like that. Moving on. Starting and ending meetings, having a strategy for how you do that is really important. I will say something I always try to remind myself of is whenever I have a meeting or a call, I'm kind of coming in with my own plan and my own agenda for what I want to get out of that meeting. But remembering that that goes both ways, and your client can also be coming into the call having their own agenda and their own priorities and things that they want to talk to you about. So at the start, I'll usually say, hey, we have this amount of time to talk today. I have, a hard stop at whatever time. I have another meeting, another call, whatever. Here are the things that I wanted to talk to you about today. What did you want to talk about today? And making sure that I leave time for that if I can. And then at the end of the meeting, making sure that you're reviewing anything that you're expecting the client to do before the next time that you talk, and also making sure that you're making a plan for when you're going to be next in touch. The next thing I want to talk about is like maintaining boundaries. It's very common for clients to have multiple legal issues going on at once, or other issues that are not necessarily strictly legal issues, but things that they're experiencing that they may be talking to you about. It's okay to say that something is not in your area of expertise and that you aren't going to be able to help with that thing. It's okay to listen to things too, if even if you aren't able to do anything about them, but making it clear what you're able to help with and what you're not able to help with. You can also try to connect them with organizations that may be able to help them with whatever the other issue is that they're experiencing. Um, Legal aid, as you know, we have a lot of different units, and we also have a long list of referral organizations. And it's very normal for us to be trying to connect people to different resources. And so if your client is talking to you about issues that, are outside of the scope of your case with them, you can also reach out to your legal aid mentor about that and see if we can refer them anywhere. The next thing's a video.
I'm so stressed about my case. I need you to call me every day to let me know if anything has changed. I'm so anxious, I can't sleep at night. It's affecting my whole life, and I feel like if I don't hear from you that you're ignoring me.
I hear how stressful this wait is for you, and wanting daily reassurance in this situation is very understandable.
Exactly. So if you could just promise to call me every day, I would feel a lot better.
I want to support you through this, but I have to be honest. Calling you every day is not going to be possible. If I spend that much time on your calls, I wouldn't be able to give time to your case or any of my other clients' cases the attention they deserve. But what I can do for you is I can give you updates whenever there's movement on your case. And if nothing has changed, I can still check in with you once a month so that you know that you haven't been forgotten about.
But what if something happens and I don't know about it? No one tells me.
I understand why you would be worried about that, but you can trust that if there is any updates in your case, I will contact you right away. You don't need to worry that you'll be missing something important. And to help with the waiting, I can also give you a handout that explains what usually happens in these cases and how long each step takes. That way, you'll know what to expect.
Okay, we can try that. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
So just talking a little bit about why that interaction worked. It validates how the client is feeling instead of dismissing their feelings. It explains the boundary, explains the reason for the boundary, and it also offers a plan moving forward, a compromise, tools to move forward, that kind of thing. And so next I want to talk about, there's a reflection question. I think we can open the chat for this. like people to think about, a time that you received disappointing news and how did the way that it was communicated impact you? Or try and remember a time that you had to deliver bad news to somebody and what did you do and what did you wish you had done differently? I'll wait for people to respond in the chat and I'll share an example from my own practice. I feel like I have the tendency when I'm sharing bad news to kind of it's not I don't know if you guys have heard about a compliment sandwich where when you're telling somebody that, there's something that you want them to fix, you sandwich it with the compliment. You did great with this. You should improve this and then you did great with this. And I have a tendency to want to do that with sharing bad news with clients by sandwiching it with potential next steps, potential alternatives or kind of like something that did go well. So I'll say, oh, we lost this piece, but we can appeal or we have all these options, or I'll try to jump into that like too quickly, I think, without really holding space for the client to have a reaction to the bad news and talking about the bad news and giving it the space before moving on to talking about solutions, like we were saying. And it's not active listening to just jump in immediately as uh yeah, trying to jump in immediately to, okay, what are we doing next? Shula said in the chat, she tries to frame things into what's out of our control and what's in our control. And that's really real. In this area of work, there's a ton of factors that are outside of our control all the time. And focusing on what is in our control is super important. So some strategies for sharing bad news. I will say that the work of being able to share bad news effectively and well with your client, um, yes, amazing, Elena, trying to be direct and leaving space for disappointment. Absolutely. A lot of the work that goes into being able to share effectively bad news with the client is groundwork that is already laid by the relationship that you've been able to establish before using all the tools that we've talked about in this training, right? Staying in touch with your client, being empathetic, being emotionally intelligent, being trauma informed, all these tools help you build a good relationship with your client so that you are able to really just talk with them honestly and openly about bad news when it comes up in the case. I will say being direct is super important, not trying to kind of beat around the bush or be optimistic or be uncomfortable when sharing the bad news, just acknowledging that it's not the news that you guys had wanted in the case, listening to your client's reaction, empathizing with them, and then once there's been space for that, moving into next steps. And if we can go to the next slide, that would be great. We're almost there. um, Something about mistakes is that mistakes will happen, right? They're unavoidable. They happen 100% of the time. And so obviously we should try and avoid mistakes, but we also need to think about, what do we do when mistakes happen? Many mistakes can be fixed. And I think where the worst trouble comes in is if you were trying to cover things up or if you're not communicating honestly about what happened. At Legal Aid, the number one thing we learn in our orientation is that if you think you've made a mistake, if you think you've messed up, tell somebody, and we will work with you to fix it. But the most important thing is that you tell somebody, you talk to a supervisor about it. For a lot of mistakes, talking to your client about it is important. An example, a lot of the time, like I will have told a client that I will do something by a certain date or get back to them, call them at a certain time, call them on a certain date. And if I'm not able to do that, I will like always own up to it and apologize and say, hey, I know I told you I would call you on Friday afternoon, and I'm really sorry I didn't get, an answer from my supervisor by that time. I needed to, wait to talk to them until I spoke with you. And I know I'm calling you later than I said I would. And I just want to acknowledge that. People usually appreciate that. For larger mistakes, larger errors, that's something to talk to your supervisor about or your mentor about how to respond to those and how to respond appropriately. Generally speaking, trying to make a plan for next steps to correct the error, let the client know what steps you've been taking, and identifying any issues, identifying any remaining issues. So for the end of the training, brief takeaways. I'm not going to read off the slide. We talked about a lot of tools today. I will say it's always a learning practice. It's always you're never going to master all of these skills, and constantly working on them is key. Constantly learning is important. The last few slides, again, I'm not going to read off of them, but we asked a lot of legal aiders for their best tips for client-centered lawyering, and we have the slides were shared with you with some of these, some of these quotes from our colleagues, and welcome you to read them in the PDF of the slides that you received or on the screen now.
We're really glad to have seen so many participants, and we appreciate everyone spending this early morning time with us, and look forward to seeing all of you next week.